September 25th. Don't move, because that camera will not know you've moved. It's a highly trained tripod. Stays very clear, very close. We're at the old base chapel and here at Plattsburgh State, and I'm talking to Mark P. Richard, but I'm wondering if I should say Richard.
Yes, bien sûr.
Or Richard even.
Richard.
Because I had some Richards in Champlain when I was growing up, and they started off as Richard, then they became Richard, then they became Richard.
Mm-hmm.
The next generation became Richard. So you're a professor of history and Canadian studies right here at Plattsburgh State University.
Yes, I am.
All right. How long have you been here, Mark?
20 years now.
Oh, welcome to the North Country.
Thank you.
And where are you from originally?
From Maine. I grew up in central Maine in the industrial town of Lewiston, which had a French-Canadian population center.
Yeah, a lot of French Canadians moved into Massachusetts, Maine, and
that's right.
And as you're here to talk about upstate New York too. And,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know in Champlain, where I'm from, we've got a part of the Champlain village that's known as the French Village. So, you know, it's French ancestry, and my ancestry is all French. Both my parents' side and my wife's side, and everybody, you know, is all French Canadians up this way. A lot of us.
Okay, and tonight I'll be talking a little bit about Plattsburgh's French Quarter.
Right.
Okay, what was the Petit Canada of Plattsburgh in the middle of the 1800s?
Okay, so this all stuff you learned since you got here?
Oh no, this is my specialty.
Yeah, I know, but as far as Plattsburgh's interest in it, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, obviously your specialty is that, but as far as this local existence here, we're going to interrupt Helen here. She's trying to let everybody know. Now, this was originally scheduled for the museum, but they figured the crowd would be a little bit too big for there, so they moved it here to the chapel, and they moved it back about 15 minutes, right? So that allowed people to get in here. All right. So have you done these presentations before? Over the years?
Yes, quite a few over the years.
Have you? Have you written a book or anything like that?
Yes, so this is part of a book that I've written called Catholics Across Borders, Canadian Immigrants in the North Country, Plattsburgh, New York, 1850 to 1950. So I'll be presenting one little piece of that tonight.
Okay, so it's only the Catholics. Are there other French-speaking people that came across that weren't necessarily Catholic, though?
Well, there were some.
Yeah, all my family
but the large majority were.
Right. So, and I think, and I saw in the write-up, you're going to talk about the Irish, how they worked with the Irish, and of course, the Catholic churches here in Plattsburgh were basically based on ethnicity when they first started.
Absolutely, and this is a story repeated all over the Northeast.
All right. Anything else we should know about before? We don't want to give away the plot here.
No, we don't want to do that.
Okay.
Hey, thank you.
Mark. All right. Mark Richard.
Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming over here and trying to find a parking spot, and I hope you're safely off the road. I'm Helen Nurska. I'm the director of the Clinton Historical Association, and we are really pleased tonight to have Dr. Mark Richard with us. We've been hearing about this book, and we know that most of us from Clinton County have French-Canadian blood, and it's some of the names have been aborted, as you're probably going to tell us, but we're all here just to hear about this, I know, and I won't say anything more. Go ahead, Mark, you can turn it over. Oh, one more thing. If on your way out you'd like to donate to the chapel gives us this, they're a not-for-profit, and they opened up their hall to us tonight for free. So if you want to make a donation to the chapel, that would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Helen, and thank you all for turning out tonight. If I speak in my normal voice, are you able to hear me from the back? A little louder?
We don't hear you very much.
You don't hear me? Okay. Is this a little bit better? Yeah. Okay. Okay, as you can see on the screen behind me, the topic of today's talk is the origins of Plattsburgh's French-Canadian community. As this audience knows, there has been a French presence here in this region since Samuel de Champlain's 1609 clash with the Iroquois near today's Ticonderoga. As I will argue in tonight's presentation, it was not until the middle of the 1800s that French speakers formed a community here in Plattsburgh. So my talk tonight will focus on the origins of that French Catholic community here in the city. On St. Patrick's Day, 1868, the Grey Nuns who conducted St. Pierre Parish School in Plattsburgh escorted nearly 500 students to St. John's, the Irish parish, to celebrate Mass. The children, most of whom were of French-Canadian descent, sang hymns in English, and the Irish Oblate pastor, Reverend Richard Maloney, addressed them in English and French. By 1850, French-Canadian immigrants made up 32% of Plattsburgh's household heads. They had enough critical mass to withdraw from the church that they had established with the Irish to form a parish of their own, directed by the Order of Mary Immaculate, or Oblate priests. The early cooperation between the Irish and French Canadians of Plattsburgh in religious matters was typical of many communities in the northeastern United States. But over time, ethnic rivalry surfaced in those communities, leading to significant divisions. As the 1868 celebration of St. Patrick's Day suggests, events did not play out the same way here in Plattsburgh. The Oblates exercised a critical role in creating a community among Plattsburgh's French-Canadian population during the 1850s and 1860s. The Sisters of Charity of Ottawa, or Grey Nuns, contributed significantly to the process, and surprisingly enough, so did the village's Irish population. The existing scholarship on French-Canadian immigrants in the United States has focused on industrial communities in New England, shown here on this map, such as Manchester, New Hampshire, and Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Few studies have examined French-Canadian migration to New York State or to rural communities in the United States, and you'll notice that cities like Cohoes and Plattsburgh are left off this map. This presentation will examine the early experiences of French Canadians in Plattsburgh as a community study. It will particularly explore their cooperation with Irish immigrants in creating a Catholic community in the Quebec, New York borderlands region in the 1850s and 1860s. And this talk will especially consider the role of men and women religious, such as the Oblate priests and the Grey Nuns, in forging inter-ethnic cooperation in Plattsburgh in the mid-19th century. By the mid-1800s, Plattsburgh's French Catholic population nearly equaled the number of English-speaking Catholics, and the former began asking for Francophone priests. A house-to-house survey in January 1853 revealed that the majority of the village's French-Canadian residents favored a parish of their own. 25 French-speaking Catholics traveled from Plattsburgh to Montreal, 60 miles north, to prevail upon the Oblates to send them priests. Founded in Aix, France in 1816, the Order of Mary Immaculate began its work in Montreal in 1841 at the invitation of Bishop Ignace Bourget, who had met the order's founder during a trip to Rome in that year. After the Roman Catholic Bishop of Albany, John McCloskey, authorized the religious order to serve the Canadian Catholics of Plattsburgh in a stable and permanent way, the Oblate Provincial from Montreal signed a contract in Plattsburgh in August of 1853 with 5 representatives of the city's French-Canadian population. For their part, the 5 trustees agreed to provide the Oblates within 2 years a property on which to build a church, a rectory of stone or brick, and enough space to have a garden. According to the contract, the Oblates could collect pew rentals and make other collections to maintain the church. Here's a sample of an early pew rental receipt. The Oblates completed the first census of St. Pierre Parish in January 1854. In all, there were 600 families, 200 of them in the village and 400 in the countryside within 15 miles of the church site. Many of the household heads were struggling farmers and laborers. Most of the latter found work in the lumber, paper, and mining industries. To build a church of their own then was a substantial feat. It necessitated significant assistance from outside the ethnic and local communities. The trustees purchased the property from Roswell Weed of Plattsburgh for $1,418 and signed a mortgage with him for $1,218 in August 1853. An Anglo-American benefactor of Plattsburgh's French-Canadian population, Weed thus contributed $200 to the new parish. During the construction of St. Pierre Church and Rectory, the trustees had to rent a house for the Oblates, provide them with $600 yearly, and to rent a church building. But the contract allowed the trustees to retain the revenues from pew rentals and other collections until the new church was completed. In the interim, French Catholics worshipped at the building of the former Universalist Church and worked to raise funds for their new church. French-Canadian women organized a bazaar in December 1853 that raised a reported $320. Reverend Jacques Bernal, the first Oblate pastor of St. Pierre, visited parishes in Quebec and reportedly raised $1,700 during a month-long tour in 1854. Demonstrating interethnic cooperation, Irish Catholics of Plattsburgh also contributed money and supplies for the new church. In July 1854, Plattsburgh witnessed the laying of the cornerstone for the new church of St. Pierre. Reflecting a pattern that would typify public celebrations, the ceremony was a bilingual affair. A clergyman who represented the Diocese of Montreal spoke in French, and Reverend Louis de Gousperian, the Bishop of Burlington, made his remarks in English. Although recognized as a French Catholic church from its earliest days, it served a bilingual parish community. In November 1855, a concern arose about the validity of the elections of the trustees. So on 3 consecutive Sundays, an announcement was read in French and English from the pulpit that notified the congregation of this December 17 meeting of male persons of full age who have statedly worshipped in this house and with this church and have been considered as belonging there too for the election of the trustees. To meet the needs of Plattsburgh's bilingual community, as early as 1856, the Oblates serving Plattsburgh were French and Irish in origin. As we will see, this had a significant impact upon the development of Plattsburgh's French-Canadian community. Once established in Plattsburgh, the Oblate priests turned to the Sisters of Charity of Ottawa in 1860 to staff the parish school. Founded in 1737 by the French-Canadian widow, Marguerite Duville, the Sisters of Charity of Montreal had split into 4 autonomous branches by the mid-1800s, with one group forming in Saint-Hyacinthe, one in Ottawa, and the other in Quebec City. Commonly known as the Grey Nuns, the Sisters of Charity joined forces with the Oblates in different locations in British North America. The Grey Nuns traveled to the Northwest Territories in 1844, for example, to work with the native peoples and the Métis, and they were followed by the Oblates in 1845. In that same year, Reverend Pierre-Adrien Telmont, an Oblate priest, established a Catholic parish in Bytown, renamed Ottawa in 1855, and he asked the Grey Nuns of Montreal to send sisters to establish a school and hospital and to work among the sick and poor in their homes. About half of Bytown's 6,000 residents were Francophone. In response to Telmont's call, Elizabeth Briere, the 26-year-old superior, brought 4 professed nuns, a novice, and a postulant to Bytown in February of 1845. 3 of the women were French-speaking, and 3 were English-speaking. Exactly what was needed to satisfy the Bytownians, writes the historian Sister Paula Neal. The following month, the Grey Nuns opened Bytown's first bilingual school. A printed commendation form for students appeared in English, with blanks completed in French by Mother Brière in July 1860, suggesting that the order functioned in both languages. And as we'll see, that was important here in Plattsburgh. The Oblates also worked with the Grey Nuns here in the United States. The Oblates administered Holy Angels Parish in Buffalo, New York, and they asked the Sisters of Charity of Ottawa to come to Buffalo in 1857 to teach and to care for the city's poor and sick. So close was the working relationship of the Oblates with the Grey Nuns of the Cross, as they were also known, that their foundress wanted to put the order under the direction of the Oblates. Brière wrote the head of the Oblate order in France in January 1860 to pursue that objective. Given their close ties and past collaboration, the Oblates naturally turned to the Sisters of Charity of Ottawa in 1860 to work with them here in Plattsburgh. Monsignor J.E. Guigu, Bishop of Ottawa and a member of the Oblate Order, served in his role as the Oblate Provincial, or secured in his role as Oblate Provincial, the permission of Bishop McCloskey of Albany for the Grey Nuns to establish a boarding school in Plattsburgh. He also presided over the General Council, that was the governing apparatus, of the sisters that named the 8 who would serve here in Plattsburgh. In September 1860, Reverend André Garin of Plattsburgh arrived in Ottawa with McCloskey's letter in hand to meet the 8 sisters who would serve his parish community. Mother Brière gave him some items for the bazaar that would be organized to assist the sisters financially. At Garin's request, 2 sisters departed Ottawa in mid-October to prepare the newly built convent, and about 15 women from the parish assisted them with sewing. By their various efforts, the women proved instrumental in helping establish French-Canadian institutions in Plattsburgh. Anticipating the arrival of the Grey Nuns, the parish women had organized a bazaar in December of 1859 to raise money for a convent school to educate girls. When Plattsburgh's French-speaking population organized the celebration of Saint Jean-Baptiste Day in June 1860 to honor the patron saint of French Canadians, they noted in their newspaper advertisement that the Canadian ladies, meaning the parish women, would prepare the dinner and that the proceeds from the event would benefit the new convent being built for the Grey Nuns. In November 1860, Mother Brière escorted 6 more nuns to Plattsburgh using the train tickets Garin had provided. After the benediction of the convent, the sisters entertained large numbers of visitors. French-Canadian, Irish, and Protestant women paid homage to Brière and the 8 founding sisters. The nuns were particularly struck, as were the Oblates, by the numerous Irish visitors, noting in their chronicle, which was written entirely in French and which I translate into English, it is a mark of the affection that a large number of Irish men and women are showing us. The sisters had much work yet to do. Prior to their arrival, Catholic children of Plattsburgh only had Protestant schools to attend, they noted. The sisters went house to house to recruit students to their parochial school of St. Pierre and to their boarding school for girls. Provided directions by one of the priests, Mother Brière and Sister Eleanor Lavoie, the founding superior at Duville Convent, headed one way, while Sister Amelia Robillard and Mary Dufresne, who was the housekeeper at the Oblate Rectory, proceeded in another direction. Meanwhile, sisters of Irish and Anglo descent recruited Irish children in other areas of Plattsburgh and its vicinity. Sister Marie de la Conception, née Rachel Curran, and Sister Duville, née Amelia Walling, recruited students among the Irish parishioners of Reverend Richard Maloney. An Oblate priest of Irish ancestry, Maloney resided at the rectory of St. Pierre Church with the other Oblates of Plattsburgh, Reverend André Garin and Reverend Claude Salaz, the latter 2 originally from France. Maloney had become pastor just a few months before the arrival of the Grey Nuns of the church at which the French Canadians and the Irish had previously worshipped together. It became reincorporated in 1863 as St. John the Baptist Church. The sisters recorded in their chronicle that they established a current of fine kinship with the Irish Church based on its shared faith tradition and a devotion to the Roman Catholic Church. The sisters also received important assistance from Irish benefactors, Elizabeth and Bernard McKeever. Both born in Ireland, the McKeevers were a pious couple of means. They brought the Grey Nuns in the stagecoach, pulled by 2 horses, to the Irish settlement, located a few miles from the village of Plattsburgh, so that they could recruit students for their parish and boarding schools. For McKeever, religion trumped ethnicity. He told the Grey Nuns, "Your presence here," recorded the sisters in French, "will be like in Plattsburgh, the best propaganda in favor of Catholic institutions." The nuns and the McKeevers assisted apparently were a force to be reckoned with. The chronicler of the convent noted in November 1860 that my sister, Marie de la Conception, exerts all her strength to persuade parents to place their children in the convent school, and several touch her hand as a sign of promise. The Grey Nuns thus recruited among the faithful from the 2 languages for their 2 schools. When St. Pierre Parish School opened under the Grey Nuns in mid-November 1860, there were 100 students, 20 of whom were Anglophone, the sisters recorded. While a large majority of students were French-Canadian, Irish pupils made up a sizable minority. The academy the sisters began in their convent initially enrolled 15 girls as day students, and a few boarding students joined them after it opened. Some of their initial teaching supplies came both from Gruyère, who sent religious books for their library, and from Garin, who procured textbooks in 2 globes during a trip to Montreal. The Grey Nuns recorded in their chronicle during their first month in Plattsburgh that many different members of the community assisted them. The sisters noted that Plattsburgh's French-Canadian population was poor, but its members demonstrated goodwill and proved helpful in many ways. French-Canadian women would wash floors and do laundry for the nuns. Boys would cut wood and bring them water, and the men would assist according to their means. Irish men and women from the village of Plattsburgh and from the Irish settlement brought the sisters various provisions. As plans for a bazaar became publicized, people with French, Irish, and American surnames stopped by the convent to donate articles. Throughout their first decade in Plattsburgh, the Sisters of Charity relied heavily upon the assistance of community members, but they were not passive. They were active in soliciting the funds and provisions that they needed. Their chronicle indicates that they particularly worked the countryside. In December 1861, for example, the Superior and another sister visited farmers in the Irish settlement. They stayed overnight at the home of a Mr. Fitzpatrick, and they continued their collections the next day. In February 1864, the sisters visited farmers for provisions to help them get through the winter, recording that the good farmers of this place, especially the Irish, were generous with them. The celebrations of St. Patrick's Day highlight these inter-ethnic connections in Plattsburgh. Shortly after their arrival, the Grey Nuns forged important ties with the village's Irish parish. Evidence of that, the Grey Nuns point out in their own historic account, can be found in their celebrations together of St. Patrick's Day in March 1861. On that day, the sisters escorted their students to Reverend Maloney's church, where they found that Bernard and Elizabeth McKeever had reserved pews for the younger pupils. The older students helped with music by singing 2 pieces, and Reverend Garin sang a high mass, assisted by Reverend Salaz and Reverend Maloney, oblate priests from Plattsburgh's 2 Catholic churches. When the sisters returned to their convent, they discovered that Maloney had sent candy for the children. They commented in their historical account, this exchange of courtesy and religious fraternity will repeat itself from year to year, and their chronicles attest to that. In 1865, the sisters brought their boarding students to celebrate High Mass on St. Patrick's Day at St. John's Church. And they were met at the door again by Bernard McKeever, who ushered them to the front pews. In 1868, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the sisters escorted nearly 500 students to the 8 a.m. Mass at St. John's to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, where they sang hymns in English. Reverend Maloney addressed the children in English and French, and they were given candy after Mass. Candy was always the draw. On St. Patrick's Day, 1869, when the sisters again brought their students to the 8 a.m. Mass at St. John's Church, the pupils carried the banner of Ireland. Reverend Maloney again addressed the students in French and English, and again they found candy awaiting them when they returned to their classes. To conclude, ethnic isolation then did not characterize the development of Plattsburgh's French-Canadian parish, as it did in some northeastern industrial communities, such as St. Pierre Parish of Lewiston, Maine, in its formative years. Unlike in most northeastern communities with French-Canadian populations, Irish descendants in Plattsburgh contributed substantially to the formation of the French Catholic community, especially by supporting the schools of the Grey Nuns. As the St. Patrick's Day celebrations attest, the sisters responded in kind. This ethnic intermixing in Plattsburgh can be attributed in large part to the orders of women and men religious who served in the village. Both the Oblate priests and the Grey Nuns had Irish members, and both orders actively facilitated the mingling of Irish and French Canadian Catholics in the community. In doing so, men and women religious of Plattsburgh helped the Francophone community of rural upstate New York to chart a different course than most of New England's French-Canadian population centers. Thank you. So this is one piece of my most recent book, Catholics Across Borders. I'd be happy to take questions if you have some. David?
Is this focused on the border here in New York, or is it more border between Vermont and parts of New England?
So this is a community.
It's just about Plattsburgh then?
Yes. So the focus is Plattsburgh, and I make some comparative comments with New England to show some of the contrasts and similarities. Yes.
Our Lady of Victory, could you share some information about that foundation?
Okay, so that happened in a later period. Tonight I spoke just about the 1850s, and that church came about in the early 1900s. So as the population grew larger, they sectioned it off a little further away from where St. Peter's is. And it was a different group of nuns.
As I recall, they had a boarding school at Our Lady of Victory too.
That's right. So here, the first order at St. Peter's was Sisters of Charity of Ottawa, and they were replaced by the Dominican nuns in the 1920s. And at Notre Dame de Victoire, it was Sisters of Charity of St. Louis, who originally were from France and then eventually the Canadian order. So their mother house today is in Lévis, Quebec. Yes?
They supported each other in terms of religion. Did they use the term intermarry? Or did they stay to their own ethnic group?
So I didn't look at that particular issue here, but in other communities, what tended to happen is that in the 1800s, they tended to marry within their own group, and over time, there was more intermixing, such as the turn of the 20th century and then into the 20th century. So it's a process that happened over time. So the intermarriage in many places in New England was the mixed marriages were within the Catholic Church, but with different ethnic groups. and then over time outside the Catholic Church. In the back.
The French that were here, were they always here? Were they here before the American Revolution? Was this the French that were here? Was this just an extension of Quebec? Or did they immigrate here, for instance, after 1750 when you had the problem with the Acadie and they came, because you had the map there with all the French colonies, and they're mostly along the coast, and that would be the Acadians, the Acadie that came down from the valley. So the French from here, were they here before?
Okay, so there's been a French presence in this region since the early 1600s when Samuel de Champlain made his incursion here. There were, most of British North America rejected the American Revolution, but there were some Canadians, French Canadians and Acadians, who supported the American cause. And the state of New York granted them some land here in upstate New York. So they were here much before this period of time that I was discussing tonight in the 1850s. But it was from that point on, the 1850s, that the community kind of gelled here as it began to establish its institutions like a Catholic church and school. Yes, in front.
Well, thanks for your presentation, very interesting. I'm not that familiar with the history of French Canadians in the United States, but most of the time, if I'm correct, there were a lot of tensions, even competitions between the Irish and the French Canadians, to the point that there were some fighting between both groups. Now, you say that that situation did not happen in Plattsburgh. Is Plattsburgh an exception? At some point you said that women played a very important role in the easing of the tensions between the Irish and the French Canadians. It did not happen in other, let's say, Francophone communities in other cities in New England. So I'd like that you develop them to that matter, because it seems to be very important.
Okay, so the story in most other areas of New England were heated exchanges between the Irish and French Canadians, sometimes within the Catholic Church and sometimes outside of it. In my hometown of Lewiston, Maine, for example, my grandparents would talk about the big fights that took place downtown between the French and the Irish. So that's a story that got repeated in a lot of sections, French Canadian population centers in New England that I had shown on the map. So that's a story that was told in most of those areas that you see represented on this map. And to my surprise, when I dug into the sources here, it was a different story here in Plattsburgh, and I attribute that in large part to the Oblates and the Sisters of Charity and some of their early work here in the community. There were some tensions that arose once in a while, but not like you saw in other communities. Now, there was some outside of Plattsburgh, in other areas of upstate New York. If a community, if a church group had a lot of French speakers and the bishop appointed an English-speaking priest, there might be some tensions that would break out. That happened in other areas, but I didn't come across that at all here in Plattsburgh. Okay, there's a hand back here.
Reasons led to the end of bilingualism in this area. My father spoke fluent French before he ordered English, and he was born and brought up in Stanishville. His mother and father spoke fluent French, so did his grandfather and his grandmother. I'm just kind of curious. For instance, his name was anglicized by a parish priest. Really, it's L-E-D-U-C, but they made it L-E-D-U-K-E, which was common for a parish priest to do that. But I was wondering, what other reasons led to the end of bilingualism as an ordinary practice?
In a lot of communities in the Northeast, the short answer was discrimination. Okay, and the difficulty moving ahead with succeeding generations. The school here in Plattsburgh was bilingual from the beginning. In a lot of northeastern communities, they still taught most of the classes in French until the early 20th century. But in the St. Pierre Parish community was bilingual right from the beginning, so it kind of had a leg up on that. But moving away from the bilingualism to strictly a unilingual English preference was a process that happened all throughout the Northeast, and largely because of discrimination against French speakers. And was a hint here?
I might have missed it because my hearing isn't the best, but which was the first Catholic church in Plattsburgh?
It was St. Peter's.
St. Peter's?
Yeah, and then Notre Dame de Victoire.
Is that it? Any more questions? Have a chance?
Mark, did you,
There's a question here.
mine is an easy one, and it's of our lifetime from the 1950s in our town, as far as language. When TV arrived, many of us as young people, boys and girls, wanted to be like what we saw on TV. So you didn't want to be, bilingual. You wanted to be hip, have the funny hairdo and the leather jackets and all. So nobody wanted to be that normal bilingual person. They wanted to be, hey guy.
Yes, so the 1950s and 1960s saw that assimilation into U.S. society proceed at a much more rapid pace. It's a good observation. David?
Did you pay any attention to where the French who migrated to Plattsburgh came from in Quebec?
No, I didn't look at that.
Did you talk about in your book, did you write about the community, Champlain Street, Lafayette, where all the French families were?
Yes, and you'll see on the, let's see if I can get this right. Oh, let me go back. You see the bottom part of it, that's the map is the Little Canada section of Plattsburgh.
I can't see it, but go ahead.
Oh, okay, it's the very bottom under my name. But yes, I do discuss that a little bit in the book. Yes?
I know you mentioned the Irish settlement. Where was the Irish settlement at? Was that down the Irish settlement road, or is it out that way?
I think so. Those of you from this area might know better than me. About 15 miles away.
Out that way.
Yeah, there's St. Patrick's Church out there. Got one in the road now, but out in that area. Founded in 1840 something. 1840.
Did Keysville have a French-speaking and Irish?
Yes, that's right. So there were all kinds of pockets all around here. In fact, some of the oblates served some of those parishes at different points that would be non-resident priests in some of those areas.
I graduated from the Duville Academy School here in Plattsburgh, and I was one of the last classes to attend there because they were closing the school. That was in 1957, I graduated.
Were you a day student or a boarding student?
No, it was just a day school.
It was just day students then.
Did you know anything about MAI or the Mounds?
Yes, I didn't talk about that tonight, but I did talk about the origins of MAI and the Brothers of Christian Instruction who came in to teach that school.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.